Welcome back to the Restorative Grief Podcast with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and I'm so grateful that you've chosen to join me again. Each episode is written with a desire to help you grow in grief literacy and understanding so that you can become the person you need the most when it comes to navigating loss. There's an invitation that goes around social media every few years, and I saw it again this week. Become the person you needed most when you were a child. And the same is true of grief. By deciding to do this work for ourselves, we become the space holders and grief supporters we are looking for in the world around us. With any luck, our newfound knowledge and awareness of loss will create that same space to heal for others we encounter as well. This week, I want to unpack another familiar grief statement that makes the rounds on social media every few months. Every time this one is shared, it is received with a deep reverence for the truth it carries because it resonates with grievers on a level where we tend to feel unseen. As you may know, grief is an experience that is often misunderstood, and it can be so hard to express what you're feeling, thinking, or even admit what you're questioning through loss. In his book, A Grief Observed, author C.S. Lewis writes, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I am not afraid, but the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in the stomach, the same restlessness, the yawning. I keep on swallowing. At other times, it feels like being mildly drunk or concussed. There is a sort of invisible blanket between the world and me. I find it hard to take in what anyone says, or perhaps hard to want to take it in. It is so uninteresting. Yet I want the others to be about me. I dread the moments when the house is empty. If only they would talk to one another and not to me." There is so much to digest in this one little paragraph, and if you've never read his book, it's fairly short and extremely raw. I appreciate the candor he writes with, so it is worth your time to hear his grief story. Really, anytime someone is willing to share the story of loss and love, I would encourage you to lean in. It's a sacred space to hold. But let's go back to the excerpt. Grief and the fear of uncertainty are significant concerns, and Lewis connecting the similarities for us is a powerful thought to hold. In loss, our future is now irrevocably changed, and our understanding of what we can do to influence a certain outcome is being challenged as well. I think it's interesting that Lewis notes that he is not necessarily afraid, but is experiencing the same symptoms of fear through his grief. He is aware of how his body has internalized the loss of his wife. Grief has impacted his nervous system and his digestion. His thoughts are fogged and creating a sense of distance between himself and the world. And yet, despite his expressed inability to comprehend what others are saying, he still wants to remain in their presence, together but left alone. I think grief feels so like fear because we have no idea what to do or say first, and it's terrifying to feel so confused. There's a significant tear in the fabric of our lives, and it can feel impossible to know how or where to begin mending. And this is the tension of the in between, the space after loss, but before any restoration. It's bizarre to learn how to exist in the headspace where we don't want to be alone, but cannot figure out how to be with others. We are searching for a sense of normalcy, but cannot seem to find it anywhere we look. But I think we need to look inward. I want us to recognize what we need internally in body, mind, and spirit. But how do we recognize the way grief is manifesting in our bodies, minds, and spirits? And once we recognize it, what can we do to restore a sense of peace internally and for our unknown futures? Now, I realize these are huge, scary questions, but I know that you're here because you are asking some of the same unanswerable questions to yourself. I think we start by admitting that nothing we do leaves us standing still. In every decision we make, we are moving closer to or further from the person we want to become. And grief is no different. In our loss, we pursue comfort and hope to find ways to feel like ourselves again. But for most of us, we might have struggled with our stories even before grief entered the chat. Did you know how to tell the story of who you are before your loss? Or when someone says, "Hey, tell me about yourself," is your default to start with your work or where you were born? It's really easy to identify our story with the externals of what we do and where we go in our day to day lives. But our actions and origins are not the crux of our story. Our story comes from the way those external circumstances have shaped our internal sense of self. Because grief shakes our internal lives by trashing the externals. So it makes sense that our healing begins when we recognize and rebuild our internal sense of self. Who are we today that we weren't yesterday? Who will we become tomorrow? What do we believe about our lives that honors who we are now, where we've been, and what or who we've lost? Reorganizing our external lives around our losses begins internally. So I want to invite you to take a moment and reflect. Now, if you're listening to this and are able to grab a pen and journal, that's a great idea, but don't worry if you're not. And as a side note, before we go too far, if you are someone navigating grief from a trauma that involves your body, this conversation can be a difficult one. Working with a trauma informed professional one on one is a really important step to finding reconnection in your body. And so, if that's you, don't start with the body work I present here. Uncovering connections to your story does not and should not begin with a place of revisiting pain. Start where you're comfortable. And if you have not yet listened to episode 2, Opening a Window, I would encourage you to listen to it and learn about the window of tolerance. The questions I want to present here may be a little too much right now, and that's okay. But knowing about the too muchness of this episode can be difficult without an awareness of your starting point, which is exactly what episode 2 presents. So, diving into the questions. If you're starting in your body, bring some awareness to your physical position on the chair or the floor where you are. Where do you feel you are experiencing grief in your body? How's the tension in your shoulders? At the thought of your loss, how does your stomach respond? Is there a change? What about your heart rate or your breathing? To begin in your thoughts, consider if you are clued in to the conversations happening in your day to day life. If you work with others, are you able to engage in conversations that require your input rather than just listening? How has your focus been during your hobbies or your personal conversations? Can you name the individual emotions you're experiencing beyond the obvious labels of sad, angry, or scared? And to start addressing your spirit, get creative. Are you able to hear with your heart? Does your inner knowing have a sense of confusion or clarity? Has your relationship to your faith practice changed or shifted in a way that feels distant or completely disconnected? If you want to pause this episode and answer those questions, please do it. And just a reminder, if you do so, that finishing a podcast episode in one sitting is a morally neutral decision, just as morally neutral as finishing it in parts. Neither action can be labeled as good or bad. It's just what you need most in that moment. So please hold yourself to a standard of grace if you need to pause and come back to this. But regardless of when you finish this episode, I want to point out that a lot of your answers might feel a little discouraging. Perhaps all you can write is, "I don't know." This grief work is not going to be easy, and I don't blame you or hold you accountable for struggling to find words for these big questions. It's very normal to experience a crushing sense of doubt and confusion when navigating loss. These questions and many others arose almost immediately in the grief process for C.S. Lewis. As a well respected theologian and Christian author, I believe his honest account of the reckoning and doubt over losing his wife validated the grief story of so many others at the time who weren't able to speak out. He was a voice willing to say hard truths about uncertainty and the value of remaining in that place of discomfort for a season. We have a choice in grief and life to encounter resistance with swords, anger, and all the spitfire within us. Or we can recognize a shift in our external lives as a chance to soften and surrender. As much as it pains me to affirm this, we are not in control of the world around us. We're only in control of how we navigate the waves from the helm of our ship. These waves are totally unwelcome interruptions to our life plans, but still, we are responsible for responding. And as we've discussed, much of that response starts internally with a new level of self awareness and compassion for our starting points, no matter how rough they feel. We are not chasing down the end of grief or a state of being where we will finally be healed. We are grievers in pursuit of an ongoing healing, one that continually returns us to ourselves and to wisdom and establishes a loving, confident sense of self in our present daily lives. It is my belief that by remaining present with ourselves, honest with our heartaches, and brave in sharing our breakthroughs, we will start telling our stories without minimizing or setting our grief to the side. Grief is a natural, expected part of life. To comprehend this truth means reckoning with the disruptions each loss brings and still finding peace on the other side. It's not easy, but it and you are always going to be worth the effort. Thank you for listening to episode 5 of Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I hope this conversation about fear and grief, along with all of those really big questions I offered, can be a starting point for you to experience a little movement in your story. The truth is, in grief, we all feel stuck sometimes. Movement, however small, is something to be celebrated. So even if you're not ready to answer every or any of the questions, I want you to recognize that just listening to a podcast about grief counts as movement. As always, you can find me on Instagram or Twitter at Mandy Capehart or online at mandicapehart.com. There's a transcript of this episode available for you as well, linked in the show notes. I want to leave you this week with one more quote attributed to C.S. Lewis as a reminder that no matter how long it takes or when you begin, each small act of grief work will move the needle toward wholeness. He writes, "Something quite unexpected has happened. It came this morning early. For various reasons, not in themselves at all mysterious, my heart was lighter than it had been for many weeks." Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.